The emergency beacon pulsed weakly through the twisted metal of the downed transport ship, its red light casting eerie shadows across the barren landscape of Kepler 442b. Staff Sergeant Maria Vasquez pressed her back against the cold hull, her left leg useless beneath the makeshift tourniquet she had fashioned from her uniform sleeve. Blood had long since dried on her hands, and the pain had settled into a constant, throbbing reminder of her situation. 3 days. 3 days since the transport carrying humanitarian supplies to the refugee camps had been shot down by hegemony raiders. 3 days since her crew had died in the crash. 3 days of waiting for a rescue that might never come. The small American flag patch on her shoulder had somehow survived the crash intact, its red, white, and blue colors standing out against the torn fabric of her uniform. She touched it gently, remembering her grandfather's words about the flag he had carried through Vietnam. "It's not just cloth, Mija," he had said. "It's a promise. A promise that we don't leave our people behind." But here she was, alone on a hostile planet, with nothing but her sidearm and the emergency supplies from the wreckage. The irony wasn't lost on her. Maria had been a Navy SEAL for 8 years before transferring to the Galactic Defense Corps Humanitarian Division. She had seen combat across 3 star systems, earned commendations for valor, and never once left a teammate behind. The transition to humanitarian work had been her choice, a way to use her skills for something other than war. Her unit specialized in delivering aid to war-torn worlds, often working in the gray areas between official military operations and civilian relief efforts. The mission to Kepler 442b had seemed routine. The planet housed nearly 1 million refugees from the ongoing conflict between the Terran Alliance and the hegemony, beings from dozens of species who had fled their homeworlds seeking safety. The camps were understaffed and undersupplied, and Maria's team had been tasked with delivering medical equipment and food synthesizers. She should have known it was too easy. The hegemony raiders had appeared out of nowhere, their ships emerging from behind the planet's twin moons like predators stalking prey. The transport had no weapons, no shields worth mentioning. It was a sitting duck, and the raiders had taken their time picking it apart. Maria remembered the final moments before the crash with painful clarity. Captain Henderson at the controls, fighting to keep them airborne as systems failed around them. Corporal Kim working frantically to send out a distress signal. Dr. Patel trying to secure the medical supplies that could save hundreds of lives in the refugee camps below. All dead now. All except her. The crash site was in a valley between 2 mountain ranges, surrounded by the purple vegetation that gave Kepler 442b its distinctive appearance from orbit. The air was breathable, barely, though it carried a metallic taste that reminded Maria of blood. The gravity was heavier than Earth standard, making every movement an effort even without her injured leg. On the first day, she had tried to reach the emergency communicator in the cockpit, but the forward section of the transport had been completely crushed. On the second day, she had attempted to repair the personal beacon in her survival kit, but the crash had damaged its power core beyond her ability to fix. On the third day, she had accepted that her survival depended on someone detecting the ship's automatic distress signal. If it was even still transmitting. The sound of engines approaching made Maria's heart race. She grabbed her sidearm and checked the charge indicator. Still nearly full, she had been conserving power, hoping she wouldn't need to use it. But, as the sound grew louder, she realized it wasn't the familiar whine of Terran Alliance ships. 3 sleek vessels descended toward the crash site, their hulls bearing the distinctive markings of the hegemony. Not raiders this time, but regular military. Maria watched through a gap in the wreckage as the ships landed in a triangle formation around the transport, their landing thrusters kicking up clouds of purple dust. Her training kicked in automatically. She checked her weapon, inventoried her remaining supplies, and evaluated possible escape routes. The injured leg made running impossible, but she might be able to find a defensible position in the rocks if necessary. The hegemony soldiers that emerged from the ships were a mixed group. Maria counted 12 of them, representing at least 4 different species. The leader appeared to be a Corvan, his reptilian features marked by the ritual scarification that indicated high rank. 2 others were clearly Sithrak, their massive frames and forearms making them ideal heavy infantry. The rest were various humanoid species that Maria couldn't identify from her position. They approached the wreckage cautiously, weapons drawn but not aimed. Professional, disciplined. That was both good and bad news. Good because they were less likely to shoot first and ask questions later. Bad because they would be thorough in their search. Spread out, the Corvin officer commanded in accented Galactic standard.
Check for survivors and salvageable equipment. Command wants to know what the humans were really carrying.
What they were really carrying.
Maria felt a surge of anger.
The humanitarian supplies weren't a cover for military equipment. They were exactly what they appeared to be: food, medicine, and hope for refugees who had lost everything.
But the hegemony couldn't believe that the humans would risk valuable assets for something so simple as compassion.
One of the soldiers approached her hiding spot, a tall humanoid with pale blue skin and large, dark eyes. Maria held her breath, finger on the trigger of her sidearm. The soldier peered into the shadows where she was concealed, his head tilting as he tried to make out shapes in the darkness. Then, he saw her. For a moment that stretched like eternity, they stared at each other. The soldier's weapon was lowered, and Maria could see surprise in his expression. She was just another casualty to him, wounded and helpless. His training told him to report her immediately to his commanding officer. Instead, he stepped back and called out to his teammates. "Nothing here but scrap metal," he lied. The other soldiers continued their search, and the blue-skinned soldier moved on as if he had never seen her. Maria didn't understand why he had spared her, but she wasn't about to waste the opportunity. She settled back into her hiding spot and waited. The hegemony troops spent nearly an hour going through the wreckage, and what they found seemed to frustrate them.
Medical scanners, food synthesizers, water purification tablets, basic medicines.
Nothing that could be used as weapons, nothing that suggested military applications. Exactly what the shipping manifest had claimed. "Sir," one of the soldiers reported to the Corvin officer, "it's all humanitarian supplies. No weapons, no military technology."
They really were just running aid to the refugee camps.
The officer's scarred face twisted in disgust.
Impossible.
No military force commits resources without strategic gain.
Check again.
But a second search yielded the same results. The Corvin officer grew increasingly agitated as his troops confirmed that the humans had indeed risked valuable ships and personnel for nothing more than the lives of refugees from a dozen different species.
"Idiots," he spat. "The humans are even more foolish than we thought.
They waste their strength on the weak and useless." It was then that one of the soldiers spotted something that made him laugh. He reached into the wreckage and pulled out a piece of fabric, shaking the dust from it as he held it up for the others to see.
Maria's blood ran cold. It was an American flag, larger than the patch on her uniform.
It must have been part of Captain Henderson's personal kit. She knew he had carried his grandfather's flag from World War II on every mission. "Look at this," the soldier said, still laughing. "The primitive symbols they cling to. As if colored cloth could give them strength." The other soldiers gathered around, and soon they were all laughing. The Corvin officer took the flag and held it up, examining the stars and stripes with apparent amusement. "This is what they die for," he said.
Symbols. Meaningless patterns that represent nothing but their own weakness.
They could rule the galaxy with their technology and their numbers, but instead they waste their time on refugees and colored cloth. One of the Sithrak soldiers snatched the flag from the officer's hands and threw it on the ground, grinding it under his massive boot. The others cheered, and soon they were all taking turns trampling on the flag, laughing at what they saw as the ultimate symbol of human foolishness. Maria watched from her hiding place, her finger tightening on the trigger of her sidearm. She could kill maybe 3 of them before they cut her down, but it would be suicide.
She was one wounded soldier against 12 healthy enemies.
The smart thing to do was stay hidden and hope they left. But, as she watched them desecrate the flag that Captain Henderson had treasured, that her grandfather had carried through hell and back, something inside her snapped.
The smart thing wasn't always the right thing.
She thought about the refugees in the camps below, people who had fled their homes with nothing but hope for a better life. She thought about Captain Henderson and his crew, who had died trying to help them. She thought about the principles that flag represented, principles that said some things were worth fighting for even when the odds were impossible. The blue-skinned soldier who had spared her was standing apart from the others, not participating in the desecration but not stopping it either. His expression was troubled, as if he was beginning to understand something that his comrades missed.
The humans didn't fight for cloth and symbols.
They fought for the ideals those symbols represented. And, sometimes, those ideals demanded that one person stand up to impossible odds, not because they could win, but because the act of standing up mattered more than the outcome. Maria Vasquez had been trained to calculate odds, to make rational tactical decisions, to preserve her life so she could complete her mission. But sometimes the mission was bigger than survival. Sometimes the mission was about proving that there were still people in the galaxy who would fight for what was right, even when it meant fighting alone. She checked her weapon one more time and prepared to step out of the shadows. The wounded sentinel was about to make her stand. The Corvin officer picked up the trampled flag and pretended to use it to clean his boots, laughing at his own crude humor. His soldiers joined in, their mockery echoing across the barren landscape.
They didn't notice the slight movement in the wreckage behind them.
They didn't see the figure emerging from the shadows, wounded but unbroken. They didn't understand that they had just made the worst mistake of their lives. They had mocked the flag of someone who had sworn an oath to defend it.
And Staff Sergeant Maria Vasquez never broke an oath.
Maria Vasquez stepped out of the shadows like a ghost materializing from the wreckage. Her injured leg made her gait uneven, but her grip on the sidearm was rock steady. 8 years of SEAL training had taught her that pain was just information, and right now that information was telling her that she could still fight.
Step away from the flag.
Her voice cut through the hegemony soldiers' laughter like a blade. 12 weapons swung toward her in perfect synchronization, their targeting systems painting red dots across her chest. But Maria had faced impossible odds before, and fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. The Corvin officer was the first to recover from the surprise, his scarred features twisting into what might have been amusement.
Well. A survivor after all.
You should have stayed hidden, human. Now you die with your precious symbols. The flag doesn't belong to you, Maria said, her voice steady despite the pain shooting through her leg.
Put it down.
One of the Sithrak soldiers laughed, a sound like grinding stone.
1 wounded human against 12 of us? Your species really is as stupid as we thought. Maria's eyes never left the trampled flag at the officer's feet.
That flag represents something you'll never understand.
It represents the idea that some things are worth dying for.
Worth killing for. Colored cloth, the officer said dismissively.
Meaningless symbols for a meaningless species.
Test that theory, Maria said quietly. Take one more step on that flag, and find out how meaningless we really are. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. 12 alien soldiers, all armed, all healthy, facing one wounded human who should have been cowering in fear.
Instead, she stood there like she was daring them to make a move.
The blue-skinned soldier who had spared her earlier shifted uncomfortably. He had seen something in her eyes when they first met, something that had made him hesitate to report her. Now he was beginning to understand what that something was. It was the look of someone who had already decided to die fighting. The Corvin officer bent down and picked up the flag again, making a show of examining it.
You know what I think this needs, he said, pulling out a combat knife. Some new holes.
He pressed the blade against the fabric, and Maria moved.
Training kicked in like muscle memory.
She put 2 rounds center mass into the officer before he could react, the plasma bolts burning through his armor like it was paper. As he fell, she was already pivoting to engage the next target. The Sithrak to her left raised his heavy weapon, but Maria was faster.
3 shots to the chest dropped him like a falling tree.
His partner opened fire, the energy bolts sizzling past her head as she rolled behind a piece of wreckage. Kill her, someone shouted in Galactic Standard.
Kill the human.
But Maria Vasquez had spent 8 years learning how to kill people who wanted to kill her, and, wounded leg or not, that training wasn't something she could just forget. She popped up from behind her cover and put down 2 more soldiers with precise headshots before ducking back. The remaining 8 soldiers spread out, trying to flank her position. Professional tactics, but they were making one critical mistake. They were treating her like a normal enemy, someone who would fight to preserve her own life.
Maria wasn't fighting to live. She was fighting to prove a point.
She moved again, ignoring the fire that erupted around her position. A plasma bolt grazed her shoulder, burning through the fabric of her uniform, but she didn't slow down. Another bolt passed close enough to her face that she could feel the heat, but her return fire was deadly accurate. The blue-skinned soldier found himself face to face with her as she rounded a piece of debris. For a split second, they stared at each other again, and Maria saw something in his expression that surprised her.
Respect. Don't make me kill you, she said quietly. He lowered his weapon.
Maria spun past him and put 3 rounds into the soldier behind him, who had been lining up a shot at her back. The blue-skinned alien watched her work with something approaching awe. She moved through the battlefield like death incarnate, her injured leg forgotten in the heat of combat. Every shot was precise, every movement calculated. These weren't random kills born of desperation, this was surgical elimination of threats by someone who had been trained to kill efficiently and, without hesitation. In less than 3 minutes, 11 of the 12 hegemony soldiers were dead. The blue-skinned soldier stood alone among the bodies of his comrades, his weapon still lowered. Maria approached him slowly, her sidearm trained on his chest. Up close, she could see that he was young, probably new to military service. "What's your name?" she asked. "Zektar," he replied. "Third-class scout, Hegemony Defense Forces." "Why didn't you report me when you found me, Zektar?" The young soldier looked around at the carnage, then, back at Maria. "You were wounded. Helpless." It seemed wrong to condemn someone who was already suffering. Maria nodded slowly. "And, why didn't you help your comrades kill me?" Zektar was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I realized that you weren't fighting for your life. You were fighting for something else. Something I don't think I understand." Maria limped over to where the flag lay in the dust and gently picked it up. The fabric was torn in several places, stained with alien blood and purple dust, but the colors were still visible. She folded it carefully, the way she had been taught in basic training a lifetime ago. "This flag represents an idea," she said to Zektar, not looking at him as she worked. "The idea that all people have certain rights that no government, no military, no empire can take away. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Simple concepts, really." She finished folding the flag and held it against her chest. But those simple concepts are the hardest thing in the galaxy to protect. Because there will always be people who think they can take those rights away. People who think that strength gives them the right to crush the weak. Zektar looked at the bodies around them. "You killed 11 soldiers for a piece of cloth." "No," Maria said, finally, meeting his eyes. "I killed 11 soldiers because they thought that piece of cloth was meaningless. Because they thought the people who died carrying it were meaningless. Because they thought the refugees we were trying to help were meaningless." She gestured to the wreckage of the transport. "My team died bringing medical supplies to people they had never met, from species they barely knew. They did it because those people needed help, and help was something we could provide." Your commanding officer couldn't understand that. He thought there had to be some hidden military purpose, some strategic advantage we were seeking. Maria limped closer to Zektar, and he tensed, ready to defend himself. But she didn't raise her weapon. "The strategic advantage," she said quietly, "is that we refuse to become the kind of people who leave others to suffer when we have the power to help. The strategic advantage is that we choose to be better than our fear, better than our prejudice, better than our selfishness." "And if it gets you killed?" Zektar asked. Maria smiled grimly. "Then, at least we die as humans instead of living as monsters." The young alien soldier stared at her for a long moment, processing what she had said. Finally, he asked, "What happens now?" "Now," Maria said, checking the charge on her sidearm, "you have a choice to make. You can try to kill me and probably succeed. I'm wounded, low on ammunition, and you still have a working weapon. Or you can help me signal for rescue so I can complete my mission." "Your mission?" "Getting those medical supplies to the refugee camp. My team died for that mission, and I'll be damned if I let their sacrifice be meaningless." Zektar looked at the wreckage, then at the dead soldiers, then back at Maria. "The hegemony will consider me a traitor if I help you." "The hegemony already considers you a traitor," Maria pointed out. "You let me live when you should have reported me. You didn't help your comrades when they tried to kill me. In their eyes, you're already compromised." She was right, and they both knew it. Zektar's career in the hegemony military was over the moment he chose compassion over duty. The only question now was what he would do with that freedom. "The communications array in my ship is still functional," he said slowly. "I could send a signal to the Terran Alliance forces in this system." Maria nodded. "That would be a start." Zektar hesitated. "Why should I trust you? You just killed my entire unit." "Because," Maria said, wincing as she shifted weight off her injured leg, "I could have killed you too, but I didn't.
Because when you had the chance to turn me in, you chose mercy instead. And, because right now, you're the only hope those refugees have of getting the supplies they need. The young soldier looked around at the battlefield one more time, then made his decision. He activated his communicator and began transmitting on Terran Alliance emergency frequencies. Alliance forces, this is Hegemony Scout Zektar transmitting on behalf of Terran survivor Maria Vasquez. I am requesting immediate medical evacuation and supply recovery at the following coordinates. As he spoke, Maria allowed herself to lean against a piece of wreckage and, finally, acknowledged the full extent of her injuries. The adrenaline of combat was wearing off, and the pain was returning with a vengeance. Her leg was definitely broken, her shoulder was burned from the plasma graze, and she was pretty sure she had at least 2 cracked ribs. But she was alive. And, more importantly, the mission could still be completed. The flag was safe, folded and protected against her chest. The medical supplies were intact in the wreckage. And, somewhere out there, Alliance forces were receiving Zektar's transmission and preparing to respond. Captain Henderson would have been proud. As Zektar finished his transmission, Maria heard the distinctive sound of Alliance ships approaching. The cavalry was coming, just like in the old stories her grandfather had told her. "Thank you," she said to the young alien soldier. Zektar looked at her with something that might have been admiration. "I should thank you," he said. "You taught me something today that they don't teach in hegemony military academies." "What's that?" "That sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose to be weak for someone else's sake." Maria smiled despite the pain. "That's not weakness, Zektar. That's what we call being human." The Alliance ships were getting closer, and Maria could see their running lights through the purple atmosphere. Soon there would be medics, engineers, and fresh troops to complete the mission. The refugees would get their supplies, and the hegemony would learn that humans didn't abandon their responsibilities just because the odds were bad. But, first, there was something she needed to do. Maria carefully unfolded the flag and spread it out on a relatively clean section of the transport's hull. It was damaged but not destroyed, stained but not dishonored. Like the values it represented, it had survived an attempt to destroy it and come out stronger for the experience. Zektar watched her work, and Maria could see him beginning to understand something fundamental about humans. They weren't stronger because they were fearless, they were stronger because they fought despite their fear. They weren't superior because they never failed, they were superior because they never stopped trying to do better. The first Alliance ship touched down 50 meters away, and armored figures began emerging with medical equipment and weapons ready. Maria raised her good arm to signal them, and they rushed toward her position. But, even as the medics worked to stabilize her injuries, Maria's eyes never left the flag. Tomorrow there would be debriefings and reports. There would be questions about how one wounded soldier had defeated 12 enemy troops. There would be analysis of tactics and strategy and the larger implications for human hegemony relations. All of that would come later. Right now, there was just a promise kept, an oath honored, and the knowledge that some things really were worth fighting for. The flag flew in the alien wind, torn but unbroken, a reminder that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their numbers. It had always been their refusal to surrender their ideals, no matter how impossible the odds. The Alliance medical ship Hippocrates hummed quietly through space as it carried Maria Vasquez toward the orbital medical station above Kepler 442b. 3 days had passed since the rescue, and the story of the wounded SEAL who single-handedly defeated a hegemony patrol was already spreading through both military and civilian channels. Dr. Elena Reeves finished checking Maria's latest scans and set down her tablet with a satisfied expression. "The bone reconstruction on your leg is healing ahead of schedule," she said. "And the plasma burn on your shoulder is responding well to treatment. You should be able to return to active duty within a month." Maria nodded her thanks but didn't seem particularly interested in the medical details. She was staring out the viewport at the planet below, where she could see the lights of the refugee camps scattered across the northern continent. "The supplies made it through?" she asked. "Every last package," Dr. Reeves confirmed. "The medical synthesizers are already operational, and the food production units should be online within the week. Your mission was a complete success." Success. Maria wasn't sure that was the right word for what had happened. Yes, the supplies had reached their destination, but, for good people had died getting them there. Captain Henderson, Corporal Kim, Dr. Patel, and Sergeant Torres, all of them had families waiting for them to come home. "There's someone here to see you," Dr. Reeves said, interrupting her thoughts. "A hegemony liaison. He specifically requested permission to visit." Maria raised an eyebrow. "A hegemony officer wants to talk to me? That's unusual." "More unusual than you might think," the doctor replied. "He's requesting asylum with the Alliance. Says he has information about hegemony military operations that could save lives." The door to the medical bay opened, and Zektar walked in, no longer wearing his hegemony uniform. Instead, he was dressed in simple civilian clothes that made him look younger and less intimidating than he had on the planet's surface. "Staff Sergeant Vasquez," he said formally. "I wanted to thank you again for what you taught me." "Zektar." Maria gestured to the chair beside her bed. "I hear you've made some big decisions." The young alien sat down and clasped his hands together nervously. "After witnessing what happened on the surface, I began to question everything I had been taught about humans. The hegemony portrays your species as aggressive expansionists who use humanitarian missions as cover for military operations. But what I saw..." He paused, searching for the right words. "What I saw was someone willing to die for principles that didn't even benefit her directly. The refugees you were helping weren't human. They weren't your allies or your responsibility according to any treaty. You were helping them simply because they needed help." Maria shifted slightly in her bed, wincing at the pull on her healing injuries. "What are you going to do now? Asylum isn't exactly a comfortable way to live." "I've been working with Alliance intelligence to provide information about hegemony troop movements and supply lines," Zektar said. "Specifically, I'm helping them identify which raids target humanitarian shipments versus military ones. If we can better protect the aid convoys, fewer innocent people will die. And fewer Alliance personnel will die trying to protect them," Maria added. Zektar nodded. "I also wanted you to know that your story is spreading beyond the Alliance. Some of my former comrades have been asking questions about what really happened on Kepler 442b. The official hegemony report claims that you ambushed a patrol with superior firepower and technology. But there were witnesses." "What kind of witnesses?" "The patrol ship's sensor logs. The communication records. The physical evidence at the scene." Zektar leaned forward. 12 professional soldiers with full combat gear against one wounded human with a sidearm. The mathematics don't support the official story, and people are beginning to notice. Maria felt a chill run down her spine. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you've become a symbol, whether you want to be or not. There are hegemony soldiers who are starting to question their training about human capabilities. And there are Alliance personnel who are using your example to argue for more aggressive protection of humanitarian missions." Dr. Reeves had been listening quietly, but now she spoke up. "There's something else you should know, Sergeant. The refugee camps have been organizing memorial services for your crew. They're calling Captain Henderson and his team the Angels of Kepler 442b. Some of the refugees have even started learning English so they can understand human cultural traditions." Maria closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She had just wanted to complete the mission and honor her fallen teammates. She hadn't intended to start anything larger. "There's more," Zektar said quietly. 3 other hegemony scouts have requested transfers to humanitarian duties after hearing about what happened. They want to understand why humans risk so much for people they don't know. "And the hegemony leadership?" Confused and angry, Zektar admitted. "They don't understand how to counter an enemy who fights for ideals rather than territory or resources. How do you defeat someone who values honor more than survival?" The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another visitor. Commander Sarah Chen, Maria's former commanding officer, entered the medical bay wearing her dress uniform and a serious expression. "Sergeant Vasquez," she said formally. "How are you feeling?" "Ready to get back to work, ma'am," Maria replied automatically. Commander Chen smiled slightly. "That's what I was hoping you'd say. Because I have a proposition for you." She pulled out a tablet and showed Maria a series of star charts and mission parameters. "Alliance Command wants to expand the humanitarian protection program. More ships, more personnel, more coverage for refugee operations. They want someone to head up the training program for new teams. Maria studied the information on the tablet.
It was ambitious training programs for multi-species cooperation, advanced combat protocols for protecting non-combatants, cultural sensitivity workshops to help Alliance personnel work effectively with refugee populations.
Why me? She asked.
Because, Commander Chen said, you've proven that one person who refuses to compromise their principles can change the entire tactical situation.
The brass wants to figure out how to teach that kind of commitment to other people.
Zektar spoke up. If I may, Commander, there are hegemony personnel who would benefit from this training as well. People who are questioning their current assignments and looking for alternatives.
Commander Chen raised an eyebrow. You think hegemony soldiers would be willing to participate in Alliance training programs?
Not soldiers, Zektar clarified. Former soldiers. People like me who have decided that there are more important things than following orders. The refugee camps need protection from all kinds of threats, not just military ones.
Cultural misunderstandings, resource disputes, coordination problems between different species, these are areas where trained personnel from any background could help.
Maria looked between the two of them and felt something she hadn't experienced since the crash: hope. Not just hope for survival or mission completion, but hope for something better. Hope that the deaths of her teammates might lead to something that could prevent other deaths in the future. What would this training program look like? She asked.
Commander Chen activated another screen on her tablet. 6-month rotation cycles.
Teams of mixed alliance and former hegemony personnel working together on real humanitarian missions under experienced supervision. Cultural exchange programs to help people understand why humans fight so hard for principles that seem abstract to other species. And combat training focused on protection rather than aggression.
Protection? Defensive tactics, evacuation procedures, conflict de-escalation, Commander Chen explained. The goal isn't to create better soldiers, it's to create better protectors. People who can keep civilians safe while aid workers do their jobs.
Maria thought about Captain Henderson and his crew, about the refugees on Kepler 442b, about the flag that now hung in her quarters aboard the medical ship. All of those things represented the same basic idea, that some things were worth preserving, worth protecting, worth fighting for.
I'll do it, she said. But I have conditions. Name them. First, no politics. This isn't about the alliance versus the hegemony or any other government. This is about protecting people who can't protect themselves. Commander Chen nodded. Agreed. Second, every trainee has to spend time working directly with refugee populations. Not just security work, actual aid distribution, medical assistance, education programs.
They need to understand who they're protecting and why it matters.
Also agreed. Maria looked at Zektar. And, third, I want him as my co-instructor.
If we're going to teach people from different backgrounds to work together, we need instructors who understand what that actually means.
Zektar's eyes widened in surprise.
Staff Sergeant, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm qualified. You chose compassion over orders, Maria interrupted.
You risked your career to help someone you barely knew.
And you're willing to spend your life protecting people who will never be able to repay you.
That sounds like the most important qualification to me.
Commander Chen made notes on her tablet. I'll submit your recommendations to Alliance Command.
When can you be ready to start?
Maria looked out the viewport again at the lights of the refugee camps below. Somewhere down there, people were living in safety because her team had been willing to die for them. Somewhere down there, children were receiving medical treatment because Captain Henderson had refused to abandon his mission. Somewhere down there, families were staying together because 4 humans had decided that compassion was worth any risk.
As soon as my leg heals, she said. But first, I want to visit the camps. I want to meet the people we saved, and I want to see the memorial for my crew.
Of course, Commander Chen said.
In fact, that might be a good place to start recruiting.
Some of the refugees have been asking about ways they can help with the protection programs. People who've lost everything often understand better than anyone why it's important to prevent others from suffering the same loss. After Commander Chen left, Maria and Zektar sat quietly for a while, both of them processing the magnitude of what they had just committed to.
Do you really think we can make a difference? Zektar asked eventually. Maria thought about the question seriously.
1 wounded soldier against impossible odds.
One act of defiance against overwhelming force. One person choosing principles over survival. Individually, those things seemed insignificant against the vast scope of galactic conflict and suffering. But ripples had a way of growing larger as they spread, and sometimes the smallest actions created the biggest changes. "I think," Maria said finally, "that we already have." Outside the viewport, the lights of Kepler 442b continued to shine in the darkness, each one representing a life that had been saved by people who believed that every life mattered. The ripple effect had begun, and there was no telling how far it might spread. 6 months after the incident on Kepler 442b, the newly established Humanitarian Protection Academy operated out of a converted space station in the neutral zone between Alliance and Hegemony space. The facility buzzed with activity as beings from dozens of species worked together on training exercises, cultural exchange programs, and real-world mission planning. Staff Sergeant Maria Vasquez stood in the main observation deck, watching a mixed team of humans, former Hegemony soldiers, and refugee volunteers practice evacuation procedures in one of the training bays below. The sight still amazed her, people who had been enemies just months ago now working together to protect civilians. "The Corvin delegation is requesting another meeting," Zektar said as he approached, carrying a data tablet filled with scheduling requests. His role as co-instructor had evolved into something closer to diplomatic liaison, helping navigate the complex political realities of their multi-species program. "What do they want this time?" Maria asked, not taking her eyes off the training exercise below. "Same thing as always. They want to understand how you defeated 12 of their soldiers. Their military analysts have run simulations, studied the battlefield recordings, even recreated the exact conditions of the engagement. According to their calculations, what you did was impossible." Maria finally turned to look at him. "And what do you tell them?" Zektar smiled, an expression that had become much more common since he'd started working at the academy. "I tell them that their calculations don't account for the most important variable in human combat effectiveness. Which is the willingness to die for something bigger than yourself." Below them, the training exercise was reaching its climax. A simulated attack on a refugee camp required the protection team to evacuate non-combatants while maintaining defensive positions. Maria watched with professional interest as the mixed species team adapted to each other's strengths and compensated for each other's weaknesses. The team leader was Sergeant First Class Rebecca Walsh, a former Marine who had volunteered for the academy after hearing about Maria's mission. Her second-in-command was Thekvar, a former Hegemony heavy weapons specialist who had requested asylum after witnessing Alliance forces evacuate Hegemony civilians from a natural disaster. The rest of the team included humans, former Hegemony personnel, and 3 refugees who had completed advanced training programs. Watching them work together, it was hard to remember that some of these people had been trying to kill each other just a year ago. "How many applications are we getting now?" Maria asked. 47 this week, Zektar replied, consulting his tablet. 23 from Alliance military personnel requesting transfer to humanitarian duties. 15 from former Hegemony soldiers seeking asylum. 9 from refugee populations who want to help protect other refugees. The numbers kept growing. Word of the academy had spread through official military channels and unofficial networks alike. But, more importantly, it was spreading through the refugee camps and aid stations where their graduates were making a difference. "Any word from the Sithrak Collective?" Maria asked. "Ambassador Gordhak is still considering their participation," Zektar said carefully. "The collective has never acknowledged that their military personnel might benefit from humanitarian training. But, they've been quietly observing our operations for 3 months now." Maria nodded. The Sithrak were proud warriors who viewed compassion as weakness, but they were also pragmatists. If the Academy's graduates proved more effective at protecting their interests than traditional military approaches, they would find a way to participate without losing face. The training exercise ended, and the mixed team gathered for their after-action review. Maria could hear Sergeant Walsh's voice over the intercom, praising the team's coordination while pointing out areas for improvement. The tone was professional but supportive, focusing on how they could better protect civilians rather than how they could kill enemies more efficiently. "There's something else," Zektar said, his tone becoming more serious. "We've received reports from 3 different systems about Hegemony units refusing orders to attack humanitarian convoys." Maria raised an eyebrow. "Refusing orders?" "The units claim that the convoys pose no military threat and that attacking them would be beneath the honor of professional soldiers." Zektar paused. It's almost exactly the same language that several of our hegemony graduates have been using in their reports back to their former commands. This was the outcome Maria had both hoped for and feared. Every graduate of the academy was encouraged to maintain contact with their former units, sharing what they had learned about humanitarian work and cross-species cooperation. But there was always the risk that these communications could be seen as propaganda or recruitment for enemy forces. How is Hegemony Command responding? Mixed reactions, Zektar admitted. Some commanders are angry and talking about court-martial proceedings. Others are quietly reassigning personnel who seem compromised by humanitarian ideals. But a few are asking questions about why their best soldiers are choosing to work with refugees instead of fighting wars. A new voice joined the conversation. Because they're finally learning the difference between strength and brutality. Maria turned to see Dr. Amara Okafor approaching, her medical coat replaced by the practical uniform that had become standard at the academy. Dr. Okafor had been one of the first volunteers, a trauma surgeon who had lost her entire family in a hegemony raid and, then, chosen to spend her life healing former hegemony soldiers. How's the medical program coming along? Maria asked. Better than I expected, Dr. Okafor replied. We have 26 graduates now who are certified in battlefield medicine and trauma counseling. 12 of them are former hegemony personnel who are learning to heal instead of harm. It's remarkable what people can accomplish when they're given a chance to be better than their training. She gestured toward one of the medical bays visible through the observation windows. Yesterday, one of our former hegemony medics saved the life of a human refugee who had been injured in a mining accident. 6 months ago, he might have been ordered to kill that same person. Now he's developed a new surgical technique that could help thousands of people. Any word from the refugee camps? Maria asked. Camp 7 on Kepler 442b just reported their first month with 0 preventable deaths, Dr. Okafor said with obvious pride. The protection team stationed there includes 3 of our graduates, and they've implemented a comprehensive safety protocol that other camps are now requesting. This was what success looked like, Maria reflected. Not battles won or enemies defeated, but lives saved and suffering prevented. The Academy's graduates were scattered across dozens of worlds now, working in refugee camps, aid stations, and frontier settlements where traditional military approaches would have failed. There's something I need to show you both, Zektar said, activating a wall display. We received this transmission this morning from the Hegemony High Command. The screen showed a Corvan admiral in full dress uniform, his scarred features arranged in an expression that might have been diplomatic courtesy. When he spoke, it was in heavily accented Galactic standard. To the leadership of the so-called Humanitarian Protection Academy, the Admiral began. The Hegemony acknowledges that your organization has influenced the behavior of some of our former personnel. While we do not approve of desertion or treason, we recognize that your methods have achieved certain, practical results. Maria felt a chill run down her spine. This was either very good news or very bad news, and she wasn't sure which. The Admiral continued. Therefore, the Hegemony proposes a limited exchange program. We will provide selected personnel for training in humanitarian protection techniques, in exchange for Alliance instructors who can teach our forces about human tactical psychology. They want to learn how to fight like humans, Dr. Okafor said quietly. No, Zektar corrected. They want to understand why humans fight the way they do. There's a difference. The transmission continued with details about the proposed exchange program, including security protocols and oversight mechanisms. It was clearly a carefully negotiated proposal that had been approved at the highest levels of hegemony government. When the message ended, the 3 of them stood in silence for several minutes. What do you think? Zektar asked finally. Maria considered the implications. Bringing hegemony military personnel to the academy would be risky. There was no guarantee that they were genuinely interested in humanitarian work, and some of them might be intelligence operatives. But, if even a few of them genuinely learned to value civilian lives over military objectives, the long-term benefits could be enormous. I think, Maria said slowly, that we're about to find out if our principles are strong enough to survive contact with people who actively oppose them. And, if they're not? Dr. Okafor asked. Then, we learn something important about the limits of what we can accomplish, Maria replied. But, if they are. She looked down at the training bay where another mixed team was beginning their exercise. Humans, former hegemony soldiers, refugees, and civilian volunteers working together to protect people they had never met from threats they might never face. If they are, she continued, then, we might actually change the galaxy. The decision to accept the hegemony exchange program would require approval from Alliance Command and careful negotiation with the refugee populations who would be most affected. But Maria already knew what her recommendation would be. She thought about Captain Henderson and his crew, about the flag they had died protecting, about the principles that flag represented. Those principles meant nothing if they only applied to people who already agreed with them. The real test was whether they could survive contact with enemies and emerge even stronger. Zektar, start working on a preliminary agreement, she said. Dr. Okafor, I want you to design screening protocols for hegemony volunteers. We need to identify people who are genuinely interested in humanitarian work versus those who might have other agendas. And, you? Dr. Okafor asked. Maria smiled grimly. I'm going to prepare a curriculum that will either convert hegemony soldiers into protectors of the innocent, or prove once and for all that some people can't be reached. Below them, the training exercise continued, and the academy buzzed with the quiet efficiency of people who had found a purpose worth dedicating their lives to. Soon, that purpose would face its greatest test. But Maria Vasquez had faced impossible odds before, and she had learned that sometimes the most important victories came from refusing to compromise your principles, no matter how impossible the situation seemed. The academy had started with one wounded soldier defending a flag. Now it was time to see if that same spirit could defend something even more precious, the idea that former enemies could become allies in the fight to protect innocent life. The galaxy was watching, and the stakes had never been higher. 2 years after the first hegemony exchange students arrived at the Humanitarian Protection Academy, Maria Vasquez stood before the largest graduating class in the academy's history. The assembly hall contained representatives from 14 different species, including several that had never worked together before. In the front row sat Admiral Korthek, the same Corvan officer who had once led raids against civilian targets. Next to him was Dr. Sarah Kim, the sister of Corporal Kim who had died in the transport crash on Kepler 442b. Beside her was Refugee Council Representative Thala, a Sithrak who had lost her entire family to war and now dedicated her life to protecting other displaced persons. The diversity of the audience reflected how much had changed since that desperate firefight over a trampled flag. The academy now operated 12 training facilities across the galaxy, and its graduates served in refugee camps, disaster relief operations, and peacekeeping missions from the core worlds to the outer rim. 2 years ago, Maria began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustics. I was a wounded soldier hiding in the wreckage of a crashed transport, watching enemy soldiers mock the flag my grandfather carried through war. Today, some of those same soldiers' comrades are graduating as protectors of the innocent. She gestured to the graduating class, where former hegemony Marines sat next to Alliance Special Forces operators, refugee volunteers, and civilian aid workers. This transformation didn't happen because we convinced anyone to abandon their principles. It happened because we helped them discover what their principles actually meant. In the third row, Zektar smiled proudly. He now held the rank of Academy Coordinator and had been instrumental in developing the psychological screening protocols that identified candidates genuinely committed to humanitarian work. His methods had proven so effective that even traditional military organizations were adopting them for their own personnel evaluation programs. The most important lesson we've learned, Maria continued, is that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the recognition that some things are more important than your own safety. Love of family, commitment to justice, protection of the innocent, these aren't human values or Corvan values or Sithrak values. They're universal values that transcend species, politics, and military allegiances. Admiral Korthak shifted slightly in his seat. The transformation in his career had been one of the Academy's most dramatic success stories. After completing the humanitarian training program, he had voluntarily resigned his military commission and requested assignment to refugee protection duties. His knowledge of hegemony tactics and his genuine commitment to protecting civilians had made him invaluable in preventing raids on humanitarian convoys. But values without action are just words, Maria said. What makes you different from other military personnel isn't what you believe, it's what you're willing to sacrifice for those beliefs. Today, you're promising to put the safety of civilians above your own advancement, above your own comfort, above your own survival. That's not a small promise. She looked directly at several members of the graduating class, remembering their individual stories. Sergeant Martinez had volunteered after his unit was destroyed protecting an evacuation ship. Lieutenant Commander Chen had requested transfer from a prestigious posting to work in the refugee camps.
Former Hegemony Captain Veltar had defected specifically to learn humanitarian protection techniques. Some of you will be stationed in refugee camps where the living conditions are harsh and the threats are constant. Some will work on frontier worlds where natural disasters and equipment failures kill more people than military action ever could. Some will find yourselves protecting people who don't share your species, your culture, or your language. Maria paused, thinking about the reports that had come in from academy graduates over the past months.
Medical teams saving lives in disaster zones. Protection details preventing raids on civilian settlements. Cultural liaisons helping different species work together effectively. Each report represented lives saved and suffering prevented.
All of you will discover that humanitarian work is harder than traditional military service. When you're fighting an enemy, your objectives are clear and your methods are straightforward. When you're protecting civilians, every decision involves complex moral calculations and every action has consequences you can't predict. Dr. Okafor stood up from her position with the faculty and approached the podium.
"If I may add something, Commander," she said formally. Maria nodded and stepped aside. Dr. Okafor had been promoted to Dean of Medical Programs and now oversaw training for all medical personnel in the academy system. 2 years ago, Dr. Okafor said, "I hated every hegemony soldier I had ever met. They had killed my family, destroyed my home, and left me with nothing but anger and a desire for revenge. Today, I consider some former hegemony soldiers among my closest friends and most trusted colleagues." She gestured to a section of the graduating class where several former hegemony medics sat with their new alliance counterparts. "This change didn't happen because I forgot what had been done to my family. It happened because I learned the difference between justice and vengeance, between holding people accountable and condemning them forever." Admiral Korthak stood up suddenly, surprising everyone in the assembly hall. Former hegemony officers didn't typically speak at academy ceremonies, and his presence was already controversial enough without drawing additional attention to himself. "If I may," he said in his accented galactic standard, "I would like to say something to the graduating class." Maria hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Admiral, you have the floor." Korthak approached the podium with the measured pace of someone who had spent decades commanding troops in battle. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of military command but also something new: genuine humility. "I spent 30 years as a professional soldier," he began. "I followed orders, completed missions, and never questioned whether my actions served any purpose beyond military victory. I believed that strength was measured by the number of enemies you could defeat and that mercy was a luxury that soldiers couldn't afford." The hall was completely silent. Many of the Alliance personnel had lost friends or family to hegemony raids that Korthak might have planned or executed. 2 years ago, I learned about a human sergeant who fought 12 professional soldiers to protect a piece of cloth," he continued. "The official report said she had used superior technology or tactical advantages that our analysts had missed. But, when I studied the actual evidence, I realized that wasn't true." Korthak looked directly at Maria. "She fought those soldiers because she understood something that I had never learned in 30 years of military service. She understood that the symbol on that cloth represented principles that were worth dying for. Not territory or resources or political advantage, but the simple idea that all people deserve protection from those who would harm them." He turned back to the graduating class. "Today, you are promising to live by those same principles. You are promising to be the kind of people who fight for cloth symbols and abstract ideals and strangers you will never meet. Most of the galaxy will think you're foolish for making that choice." The Admiral smiled slightly, an expression that transformed his scarred features. "They're wrong. You're not foolish, you're what every sentient being in this galaxy should aspire to become. You're proof that people can be better than their training, better than their fear, and better than their prejudices." When he finished speaking and returned to his seat, the applause was thunderous. It continued for several minutes, with beings from different species, different worlds, and different military traditions united in recognition of what they had all accomplished together. Maria returned to the podium and looked out at the graduating class one final time. "In a few minutes, you'll receive your certificates and your first assignment orders. Some of you will be working together, others will be scattered across the galaxy to places where your skills are most needed.
But, wherever you go, remember that you're not just representing this academy or your species or your military organization. She thought about Captain Henderson and his crew, about the refugees on Kepler 442b, about the flag that now hung in the Academy's Memorial Hall alongside the names of everyone who had died in service to humanitarian ideals. You're representing the idea that civilization isn't measured by technology or military power, but by how well we treat those who can't protect themselves. You're proving that former enemies can become allies, that trained killers can become protectors, and that small acts of courage can change the galaxy. The ceremony concluded with the traditional oath that every Academy graduate swore, regardless of their species or background, I promise to protect the innocent, defend the helpless, and serve all sentient beings with honor and compassion. I will not abandon those in need, compromise my principles for convenience, or allow fear to prevent me from doing what is right. I swear this oath freely and will keep it faithfully, so help me by whatever power I hold sacred. As the new graduates file out of the assembly hall to begin their careers as humanitarian protectors, Maria remained behind with the other faculty members. Through the tall windows, she could see transport ships preparing to carry the graduates to their first assignments across the galaxy. Any regrets? Zekdar asked, joining her at the window. Maria considered the question seriously. Her own military career could have taken a very different path. She could have remained with traditional special forces, earned promotions and commendations, retired with full honors and a comfortable pension. Instead, she had chosen to dedicate her life to training people to risk everything for strangers. None, she said finally. Every graduate who completes this program represents dozens of lives that might be saved. Every converted enemy soldier represents hundreds of civilians who won't be targeted. Every successful mission represents the kind of galaxy we want to build. Dr. Okafor approached with a data tablet containing the latest statistics from Academy graduates in the field. Latest reports from our people, she said. 15 successful evacuations this month, 3 disaster relief operations, and 2 successful negotiations that prevented military conflicts from affecting civilian populations. And the Hegemony Integration Program? Better than we hoped, Dr. Okafor replied. 67% of former Hegemony personnel who complete our training remain in humanitarian work for at least 2 years. That's higher than the retention rate for traditional Alliance military specialties. Zekdar added, we're also seeing ripple effects in their former units. Hegemony commanders are reporting significant drops in civilian casualties during military operations, and several Hegemony worlds have requested Academy graduates to help with their refugee integration programs. Maria smiled as she watched the transport ships lift off, carrying their precious cargo of trained protectors to places where they would make a difference. Each ship represented hope that compassion could overcome hatred, that understanding could bridge differences, and that people from any background could choose to be better than their worst impulses. The Academy had started with 1 wounded soldier and a trampled flag. Now it was a galaxy-spanning network of people who had chosen service over selfishness, protection over profit, and principles over pragmatism. But the most important lesson Maria had learned wasn't about military tactics or humanitarian logistics. It was something much simpler. The values worth dying for were also the values worth living for, and sometimes the greatest victories came from refusing to abandon hope even when the odds seemed impossible. The American flag that had started it all still hung in the Memorial Hall, carefully preserved and honored. But it was no longer just a symbol of one nation's ideals. It had become a reminder that the principles it represented, freedom, justice, and the protection of the innocent, belonged to every sentient being in the galaxy who was willing to fight for them. And, across the stars, in refugee camps and disaster zones and frontier settlements, Maria's graduates were proving every day that those principles were worth any sacrifice. The wounded sentinel had become the teacher of protectors, and her legacy would echo through the galaxy for generations to come.